Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today you're joining us on a bit of a journey back in time. We're heading to the early Cretaceous of Argentina,
That's right, specifically the La Amarga Formation.
and we've got a really fascinating dinosaur in our sights, Amargasaurus.
Indeed. We've got the original discovery info, later scientific papers, lots to dig into about what made it so unique.
The bitter lizard, right? And our mission really is to unpack what made this dinosaur special. Those spines, obviously, but also its life, its environment. What do scientists think now?
Exactly. We want to go beyond just the basics and look at the ongoing questions and debates.
Okay, let's do it. So where does the Amargasaurus story actually begin? The discovery.
It kicks off in February 1984. There was an expedition led by the famous Argentine paleontologist José Bonaparte.
Bonaparte, yes.
And they were exploring the La Amarga Arroyo area in Patagonia. That's where they found this amazing, nearly complete skeleton.
Wow, near complete. That's huge for a sauropod.
It really is. And interestingly, that same expedition also turned up Carnotaurus.
No way. The horned predator. What a trip that must have been.
Absolutely. A major haul.
So this La Amarga Arroyo, that's within a specific geological formation that helps date it, right?
Precisely. The skeleton was embedded in sedimentary rocks of the La Amarga Formation. Geologists have dated these rocks to the Bramian and early Aptian stages.
Okay, so early Cretaceous. Give us the numbers.
We're talking roughly 129.4 to maybe 122.46 million years ago.
Okay, got it. Early Cretaceous Argentina. Now, the name Amargasaurus, in something specific.
It does. It's pretty straightforward, actually. La Amarga lizard. It comes directly from the discovery location. Amarga is Spanish for bitter.
Ah, the bitter lizard. And the species name, Kazawi.
That honors Luis Cazaux. He was a geologist working for YPF, the state oil company back then.
Okay.
Well, in 1983, he was the one who actually tipped off Bonaparte's team about the paleontological significance of the La Amarga Formation. Basically said, you should check this place out.
Huh. So we owe the discovery, in part, to a geologist's sharp eye.
Yeah.
That's cool. And this skeleton, the main one, it's safe and sound somewhere.
Oh, yes. It's the holotype, MACNN15. It's housed in the Bernardino Rivadavia Natural Sciences Museum in Buenos Aires. And like you said, it's remarkably complete, even has parts of the skull.
Fantastic. Now, I thought I read somewhere, was there an earlier sort of unofficial name mentioned?
Yeah, good point. There was. Bonaparte mentioned it briefly in a book back in '84, called it Amargasaurus groberi.
Okay.
But that name wasn't formally published following the proper rules. The official description and the name Amargasaurus kazaui came in 1991 in a paper by Leonardo Salgado and Bonaparte.
Got it. So 1991 is the official debut. All right, let's
Yeah.
get to the main event. Those spines, they're just wild. What did they actually look like up close?
They really are the defining feature, aren't they? It had two parallel rows of these incredibly tall neural spines running down the neck and back.
Taller than other sauropods.
Oh, yeah. Taller than any other known sauropod at the time it was found. We're talking seriously tall.
How tall are we talking? Like, give me a measurement.
Well, from the third neck vertebra onwards, the spines were bifurcated.
Meaning split.
Split down the middle, yeah, into two prongs. They were sort of circular in cross-section, tapering towards the tips. And the tallest ones, over the middle of the neck, they reached about 60 centimeters.
60 centimeters. That's nearly 2 feet? Sticking straight up?
Pretty much, yeah. Although the ones on the neck actually curved backwards a bit. They sort of angled back over the vertebra behind them.
Backwards. That's different from its relative Bajadasaurus, isn't it? Didn't that one have forward-pointing spines?
Exactly. Bajadasaurus, which was found later, also had incredibly long spines, but they curved forwards and were sort of broader near the tips. So yeah, a distinct difference there.
Fascinating. Okay, so backward curving, split spines on the neck. What about further down the body, on the back and tail?
They changed shape. The last couple of back vertebrae, the hip vertebrae, and the very first tail vertebrae also had elongated spines, but they weren't split. No, these ones were flattened out towards the top, more like paddles.
So transition from double-pronged spikes to single paddle-like spines. Okay. Now, beyond the spines, what was the rest of Amargasaurus like, its general build?
Well, apart from those spines, it had a pretty standard sauropod body plan, long neck, long tail, smallish head, big barrel-shaped body.
But size-wise, was it one of the giants?
Actually, no. It was a relatively small for a sauropod. Estimates put it somewhere between, say, 9 and maybe 13 meters long.
So 30 to 43 feet, roughly.
Yeah, and weight-wise, probably around 2.6 to 4 metric tons, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less.
So a kind of a small to medium sauropod then. What about its neck length compared to its body?
The neck was still substantial, about 2.4 meters, almost 8 feet long. Proportionally, it was about 136% of the length of its back vertebrae.
How does that compare?
It's similar to Dicraeosaurus, another member of its family, but it's definitely longer relative to its body than, say, Brachytrachopan, which was famous for having a really short neck for a sauropod.
Okay, so a decent neck, but not super elongated.
Yeah.
What about the vertebrae themselves? Any other interesting bits besides the spines?
Well, the neck had 13 vertebrae. They were opisthophilous.
Meaning?
Basically a ball and socket joint. Convex in front, concave in back, allowed for good flexibility.
Right.
The back had 9 vertebrae and probably 5 fused ones in the hips, the sacrum. The side projections, the transverse processes were pretty robust, suggesting a strong rib cage.
Okay.
And one thing that's notable for its group, the Dicraeosaurids, is that the back vertebrae lacked pluricals.
Pluricols, those are the air pockets, right?
Exactly. Those deep cavities you see on the sides of vertebrae and many other sauropods, thought to be related to air sacs. Dicraeosaurids generally don't have them in the back.
Interesting. And the legs. Forelimbs shorter than hind limbs.
Yes, that's typical for this group. The forelimbs were shorter. Unfortunately, we don't have many hand or foot bones for Amargasaurus.
Okay.
But based on relatives, it likely had 5 toes, 5 fingers on each limb.
Right. Okay. So moving to the head. I know it's incomplete, but what can we piece together?
We only have the back part, yeah. But looking at related Dicraeosaurids, we can infer it probably had a fairly short snout, maybe a bit horse-like, broad at the front,
And the teeth.
likely pencil-shaped slender teeth, probably clustered at the front of the jaws, suggests it was likely stripping leaves off branches.
A bit like a giant four-legged leaf stripper. What about things like nostrils and eyes?
The nostrils, the external nares, were positioned quite far back on the skull,
Yeah.
sort of diagonally above the eyes, and the eye sockets themselves were proportionally pretty large.
Okay. And those extra holes in the skull, the fenestrae, anything unusual there?
Well, the one below the eye, the infratemporal fenestra, was long and narrow. The one behind the eye, the supratemporal fenestra, that was interesting.
How so?
In Amargasaurus and his relatives, it was unusually small. And unlike most other reptiles of this type, you could actually see it when looking at the skull from the side. A subtle but distinct feature.
Any other skull quirks?
Yeah, a couple. The frontal bones on the top of the skull were fused together, and it had these really long, bony struts connecting the brain case to the palate called basipterygoid processes.
Are those common?
Not typically that long in most other sauropods, so yeah, these are useful details for figuring out its relationships.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's circle back to the big mystery. The spines. What on earth were they for? There must be theories.
Oh, absolutely. It's been debated since day one. When Salgado and Bonaparte first described it in '91, they threw out a couple of ideas.
Like,
Defense was one. Maybe predators would think twice about biting into that neck.
Yeah.
And display showing off to mates or rivals.
defense makes sense. They look pretty intimidating. Display, too. What else came up?
Well, Gregory Paul, back in '94, he considered the idea of skin sails, like 2 parallel ones.
But he wasn't convinced.
No, he thought sails might make the neck too stiff, and the spines weren't really the right shape being round. He leaned toward them being covered in a keratin sheath.
Like fingernail material.
Exactly, making them even longer and pointier. He suggested maybe for visual display, or perhaps they could even rattle them together to make noise.
A rattling dinosaur. Imagine that.
Hmm.
But the sail idea didn't completely die out, did it?
No, it came back. Jack Bailey in '97 compared them to things like Dimetrodon, the sail-backed pelycosaur. He argued Amargasaurus might have had a single skin sail running along the neck and back, mainly for display.
A single sail, not two.
Yeah, he thought the space between the spine rows was maybe too narrow for 2 separate sails. And recently, a 2022 study by Serta and colleagues looked closely at the bone structure inside the spines.
Osteohistology?
Right. They found lots of blood vessel channels and growth marks, which they argued fits better with being covered by vascularized skin, a sail, rather than just a thick keratin sheath. So the sail hypothesis is maybe the front runner right now.
Interesting. So evidence from inside the bone. But what about defense? Is that still on the table?
Some researchers think so. Hallett and Wadle in 2016 suggested that because the neck spines curve backward, maybe it could have speared an attacker by quickly pulling its neck back.
Ouch.
Yeah, they compared it to how modern antelopes like sable antelope or oryx use their horns defensively. They even speculated maybe they locked spines in fights with each other.
Whoa. Prehistoric wrestling.
Hmm.
Any other weird ideas? Like air sacs?
There was that suggestion too, yeah. Schwartz and colleagues in 2007 proposed that maybe the split part of the spines enclosed an air sac connected to the respiratory system,
Mm.
and maybe the upper part still had a keratin covering. So, kind of a combination idea.
Wow, okay, so defense, display sail, keratin spikes, rattling, air sacs. Still a bit of a mystery then.
It really is one of the most intriguing aspects of Amargasaurus.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, what about its senses? Could it hear well? See well? How did it hold its head?
We actually have some clues from CT scans of that partial skull. Paulina Carabal and her team did work on this. The brain case volume was estimated around 94 to 98 milliliters. The inner ear was about 30 millimeters tall, 22 wide. But the Legina, the hearing part, was relatively short.
Meaning?
Probably means its hearing wasn't super sharp, maybe less sensitive than some other sauropods studied.
Okay, so maybe not the best listener. What about head posture? Did it hold its head high?
Some early drawings showed it that way, yeah, almost horizontal, but Salgado argued those long neck spines would have made that difficult.
Right, they'd get in the way.
Exactly. The inner ear studies suggest the snout probably pointed downwards quite sharply, maybe around 65 degrees relative to horizontal,
Right.
similar to what's proposed for Diplodocus.
So looking down mostly.
Yeah, in a neutral resting pose, the neck probably sloped down gently, putting the snout maybe 80 centimeters, about 2.5 feet off the ground.
And how high could it lift its head with those spines?
Probably not extremely high. The spines would have limited the upward flexibility. The estimate is maybe a maximum feeding height of around 2.7 meters.
So just under 9 feet. Definitely not reaching the highest branches then. More of a mid-level browser.
Least likely, yes.
Okay. And how did it move? Was it slow and lumbering?
It was definitely a quadruped, walking on all fours, probably couldn't rear up on its hind legs. Salgado and Bonaparte initially thought it was likely slow
Why?
because its lower leg and forearm bones are proportionally quite short, which often correlates with slower speeds.
But there's a counter-argument.
Well, Mazzetta and Farina in '99 suggested it might have been capable of moving faster if needed. They pointed out its leg bones are actually really sturdy,
How sturdy?
even more robust apparently than those of a modern white rhino, and rhinos can definitely gallop, so maybe it had a surprising burst of speed.
Interesting. Okay, what about lifespan? Any clues from the bones?
Yes, that paleohistology work again. The 2021 study by Winholtz and Serta looked at growth rings in the limb bones and a rib.
Like tree rings?
Pretty much, yeah, lines of arrested growth.
Yeah.
Based on those, they estimated the original specimen was at least 10 years old when it died.
Okay. Was it fully grown?
Probably not quite. They saw bone features suggesting it was sexually mature, but it didn't seem to have that final outer layer that indicates growth had completely stopped. So maybe a subadult or young adult.
A teenager in dino years. Okay, let's paint a picture of its world. The La Amarga Formation. What was that environment like?
It's part of the Neuquén Basin. Back then, early Cretaceous, the sediments suggest it was an area with lots of braided rivers, a kind of floodplain environment. Amargasaurus seems most common in the older layer, the Puesto Antigua member.
And it wasn't alone, right? You mentioned other sauropods.
Definitely not alone. There were at least 3 other types of sauropods known from La Amarga.
Who were they?
There was Zaplosaurus, a rabachisaurid that's a different family within the same superfamily as Amargasaurus. Then Amargartitanus, another dicreosaurid, so a close relative, and also remains of some early titanosauriforms, though they haven't been named yet.
Wow, 4 types of long necks in one place. How did that work?
It strongly suggests niche partitioning. They were likely eating different things or at different heights.
Right, avoiding competition.
Exactly. So Amargasaurus, with its roughly 2.7-meter reach, was probably a mid-height browser. The rabachisaurids, like Zaplosaurus, usually fed lower down, closer to the ground. And those titanosauriforms, they often had longer necks, so they could potentially reach higher vegetation.
A layered buffet. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What other dinosaurs were around? Any predators?
Oh, yes. We have evidence of a stegosaur, though we don't know which kind exactly. And predators included a small ceratosaur called Ligabueno, plus teeth indicating a much larger predator was around, something like Allosaurus, a big titanoran.
Okay, so definitely some danger. Any non-dinosaurs?
Yeah, quite famously, the La Amarga Formation yielded Vincelestes.
That name rings a bell.
It's the only mammal known from the early Cretaceous of South America, so quite important. And there were also early croc relatives, crocodilomorphs. One called Amargasaurus was actually found right alongside the Amargasaurus bones.
Wow, a whole ecosystem snapshot. Okay, last big topic. Where does Amargasaurus fit on the big dinosaur family tree? Its classification.
All right, big picture. It's a dinosaur, a saurischian, lizard-hipped, a sauropodomorph, and then a sauropod proper.
Got it.
Zooming in, it's in the superfamily Diplodocoidea, and within that, the family Dicraeosauridae.
Creosauridae. What defines that family?
Generally, they're known for having shorter necks and smaller body sizes compared to giants like Diplodocus or Titanosaurs. And of course, their signature feature is those really long, often split neural spines.
Amargasaurus was the first Cretaceous one found?
Yes. Since then, others like Pilmatuea, Amargatitanes, and Bajadasaurus, all from Argentina too, have shown the group was definitely around in the lower Cretaceous. There's even possible evidence from Brazil suggesting they lasted maybe till the end of the early Cretaceous.
So a distinct group thriving then. How does it relate to other Dicraeosaurids or the bigger Diplodocoid group?
Within the family, Suwasi from the late Jurassic of North America is often seen as an early basal member. Phylogenetic analyses often grouped Dicraeosaurus from Africa and Brachytrachelopan from Argentina closer together, separate from Amargasaurus. And there's Lingwalong from Jurassic China, another member, okay?
And the whole family Dicraeosauridae sits with?
It sits within the Diplodocoidea, alongside the Diplodocidae, like Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and the Rabacosauridae, Zapalosaurus, Nigrosaurus. All diplodocoids tend to have juicy knouts and those narrow, pencil-like teeth at the front.
And both Dicraeosaurids and Diplodocids have the split spines.
Yes, that's a shared feature, though it arguably reaches its most extreme development in Amargasaurus.
Okay, amazing. Let's try and sum this all up. Key takeaways for Amargasaurus.
Well, Amargasaurus, the bitter lizard, it really stands out for that incredible double row of spines. Their exact function still debated, but display, maybe defense, perhaps supporting a skin sail, it was clearly important. It was also a relatively small sauropod for its time, living in this diverse, early Cretaceous ecosystem in Argentina, sharing the landscape with several other long-necked herbivores, likely dividing up the available food resources. It's a fantastic example of dinosaur diversity.
It really is. Just a stunningly unique creature, and it definitely leaves you, our listener, with something to ponder. Thinking about that skin sail idea, the current favorite, what would that actually mean for its life?
Yeah, how would it use such a structure? For signaling, temperature control, how did it interact with predators or even others of its own kind with this huge billboard on its neck and back?
And what kind of environment, what pressures would lead to such a bizarre and probably costly adaptation? It's amazing that a dinosaur found decades ago still sparks so much curiosity.
Absolutely. It reminds us there is still so many wonders hidden in the fossil record waiting to be understood.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.